Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a question that, let's be honest, has caused its fair share of debates over the years. Can any one religion really claim to be the only true one?
It's a big question for sure, and one that gets to the core of belief and faith.
Absolutely. And in this deep dive, we'll be focusing specifically on Christianity. But before we get into it, I want to be upfront. We're not here to tell anyone what to believe. Our goal is to explore the arguments presented in the materials we're looking at and hopefully uncover some interesting insights along the way. Sound good?
Sounds like a plan. Think of us as your guides through this exploration of different perspectives on this complex topic.
I like it. And speaking of perspectives, you've given me some pretty fascinating material to work with for this deep dive. We've got two videos from Cross-Examined. That's a YouTube channel that focuses on defending Christian beliefs, right? They call it apologetics.
Yeah, it's like building a logical case for those beliefs, a tradition that goes way back in Christianity.
Interesting. We've also got a couple of videos from a channel that features interviews with some big names in theology, including one with N.T. Wright, who I have to admit I'm a bit of a fan of.
Oh, he's brilliant. Known for his really thorough historical research on the life of Jesus in those early Christian communities.
Exactly. And last but not least, we've got a video from Dr. William Lane Craig, a Christian philosopher known for, well, his pretty intense debates on, I don't know, pretty much everything related to the existence of God and why it makes sense to believe in Christianity.
He definitely doesn't shy away from a good philosophical debate, that's for sure.
Not at all. So with these sources, we're getting a pretty diverse range of views within Christianity. But at the heart of it all, our mission today is to really understand why some people believe so strongly that Christianity is the only true path. Does that sound right?
You got it. We're going to dig into those arguments, highlight where our sources agree and disagree, and hopefully come away with a deeper understanding of this complex issue.
Okay, let's jump right in then. Both Cross-Examined videos take a head-on approach and tackle the question of truth. Like, does truth even exist? They argue that for anyone to make a religious claim, whether it's about God or even the idea that there is no God, truth has to be a real thing. What do you think about that starting point?
It's interesting how they frame that, isn't it? Almost like a paradox to highlight something really important, because even saying there is no truth, well, that's a claim to truth in itself. So logically speaking, there has to be some objective truth for any of this to even make sense.
Right. It's kind of like saying this statement is false. It just circles back on itself.
Exactly.
But then they connect this idea of truth to the existence of God, which feels like a pretty big leap.
It is a big step. And here's how they try to bridge that gap. They start with the Big Bang, which honestly is something that even most people who aren't religious accept as the beginning of the universe, this idea that the universe appeared out of nothing. And their argument is that whatever caused that, whatever created space and time and all of this, well, that something can't be bound by those things itself. Does that make sense?
So it's like a cosmic chicken or the egg dilemma.
Yes. What came first? The universe, or the thing that made the universe.
Yeah.
And because of that, they suggest this creator must be something totally outside of our normal understanding of the universe. Timeless, spaceless, incredibly powerful. And to them, all of that points to a God who is separate from the universe and who created it.
Okay, so they established this idea of objective truth, and then they used the Big Bang to suggest that there must be a creator God.
Yeah.
But why Christianity in particular? I mean, they go on to address that too, right?
They do. And for them, the resurrection of Jesus is key. It's like the bedrock of Christian belief. And they argue that when you look at it historically, it's more likely that it happened than that it didn't.
Yeah, and they make this really bold statement that the resurrection actually created the New Testament, not the other way around. It seemed kind of backwards when I first heard it.
It's a bold claim, for sure. But their point is that the resurrection had such a huge impact on those who experienced it. It was so earth-shattering that it's what sparked the early Christian church. And the New Testament came out of that movement. They argue that the people who wrote the New Testament, who were mostly Jewish, by the way, wouldn't have just made up the resurrection because it went against their core beliefs.
And I think they mentioned that there were already thousands of Christians before any of the New Testament was even written down, right?
Exactly. And that suggests that this belief in the resurrection, it wasn't some story that developed gradually over time. It was immediate. Like this huge wave of belief started by something these early Christians truly believed they had witnessed.
So it wasn't just some abstract idea, but an actual experience they staked their whole lives on.
Yes. And this leads us to a slightly different perspective, one that N.T. Wright brings up. While he agrees about how historically important the resurrection is, he focuses on something a bit different, the way those early Christians lived their lives.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. What do you mean by that?
Well, imagine they're living in this world totally dominated by Roman and Greek culture, where everyone worshipped many gods. And then you have this group saying there's only one God, and he had a son who died and came back to life. They were completely turning everything upside down.
Yeah, I can see how that would have been seen as radical.
Right. And it wasn't just what they were saying, it was how they were living. Wright points out that they were known for their compassion, for standing up for justice, caring for the poor, the sick. They weren't just talking the talk. They were walking the walk in a way that drew people in.
It's amazing to think about how their actions spoke even louder than their words, in a way.
Absolutely. And Wright believes that was a major reason why Christianity spread so quickly in the early days. People weren't just attracted to the message itself, but to the very real ways they saw belief in Christ transforming the lives of these early Christians.
That's really powerful. It speaks to this idea that faith isn't just about what you think in your head, but how it actually shows up in your actions and how you treat others.
Exactly. It's about living out your beliefs in a way that impacts the world around you.
And that's something I think we can all appreciate, regardless of our background. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.
One thing that really got me thinking, especially in N.T. Wright's talk, was this whole idea of shared experience. Like, some people were bringing up the fact that there are people out there living really good lives, moral lives, without following any specific religion. It's a challenge to this idea that Christianity is the only true way,
It is.
Yeah.
And it's something I think a lot of us wonder about, right? What about all the good people throughout history who never even knew about Christianity? Or people who find a lot of meaning in other traditions? What did Wright say about that?
He had this great analogy about railway tracks. He said, just because different trains might be on the same tracks for a bit doesn't mean they started in the same place or that they're going to the same destination. So even if people from different backgrounds share some values, like being kind, honest, generous, it doesn't automatically mean their whole belief systems are the same or that they're ultimately headed to the same place, at least in a spiritual sense.
Okay, so just because someone's a good person doesn't necessarily prove or disprove anything about whether their worldview is true or not.
Right. And Wright was careful to say that just because we see good things in other beliefs, it doesn't take away from the unique role that Jesus has in Christian faith. It's not about saying one set of values is better than another, but more about Christians believing in this distinct path to God through Christ.
That makes sense. But this whole idea of exclusivity, that there's only one right way, it makes you think about those who never even get the chance to choose that way. Dr. Craig seemed to be wrestling with this a bit in his video too.
It's a tough one, for sure. If Christianity is the only truth, what about everyone who lived and died without ever hearing about it? And while I don't think any of our sources try to give a simple answer, there is this common thread of hope that runs through them.
How so? What's that hope look like?
It all comes back to the hugeness of God's love, like a love so big, it goes beyond how we understand time and space. They seem to be saying that because God wants everyone to be saved, well, there's hope for everyone, even if we can't fully wrap our minds around how it all works.
That makes me think about some of those verses in the Bible, like in Timothy, where it talks about God wanting all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. It's powerful, isn't it? Like, God's perspective is so much bigger than ours, and maybe our human minds just aren't meant to fully grasp the mysteries of God's justice and mercy.
Totally. It's about having that faith, that trust, that there's this bigger picture we can't always see. And it makes me think about something a listener asked N.T. Wright that I found really interesting. They asked, if we're using history and evidence to back up what the New Testament says, shouldn't we do the same for other religious books too?
That's a really good question. So how did Wright respond to that? What makes the Bible different in his view?
He made a distinction between the Bible, especially the New Testament, and other kinds of religious writing. He said the Bible, particularly the Gospels, isn't just a bunch of moral teachings or mystical experiences. He sees it as a story of what God has done in the world, culminating in Jesus.
So it's more about God actually entering into human history, not just giving general advice on how to live a good life.
Right. It's grounded in things that are presented as actual events in a certain time and place. Wright's point is that this makes it different from some other faiths that are based more on personal, internal experiences, visions, or moral guidelines. He's not saying those aren't valid, but he's highlighting a difference in how Christianity sees itself. It's grounded in history.
It reminds me of those lines in John about the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us. Like, truth for Christians isn't just some abstract idea. It's something that showed up in a specific time and place in the person of Jesus.
Exactly. And that's such a powerful thing to think about, this idea that truth isn't something we just think about, but something that actually entered into human history.
Yeah.
It adds a whole other layer to this whole idea of Christianity claiming to be the only true religion, don't you think?
Wow, we've really gone deep today, haven't we?
We really have. It's been quite a journey exploring these different facets of belief and truth.
To quickly recap for our listeners, we started by looking at how some people ground the truth of Christianity in this idea of objective truth, which then leads to a belief in a creator God, who then reveals himself through Jesus, as we see in the New Testament. And then we also look at some of those counterarguments, like, what about those who have never even heard the Christian message? Or the idea of shared experience between different faiths. Those are really tough questions to grapple with.
Yeah, definitely. And we even touched on this question of looking at the historical claims of the New Testament and how that compares to other religious texts. It's a lot to consider.
It really is. And honestly, I feel like we've only just skimmed the surface. But hopefully this has given everyone some food for thought, some new ways to think about this whole idea of religious truth.
That's really what it's all about, isn't it? To keep the conversation going. Like, any good intellectual exploration often just leads to more questions.
And speaking of questions, here's one that I'm left thinking about. If, like some people argue, you don't have to believe in Jesus to experience God's love or to live a moral life, then what real difference does it make in our everyday lives? Like, how does a life live through the lens of Christian faith, with this focus on the resurrection and following Jesus' example? How does that look different from a life lived by other principles, even if those principles might seem similar on the surface?
That's a great question to wrestle with, because it goes beyond just saying, I agree with this idea or I disagree with that idea. It gets at what it really looks like to live out a belief system that claims to be both true and transformative.
It really does. It's a question worth pondering. So for everyone listening, keep exploring. Use these sources as a jumping off point, but don't stop there. Find other voices, other perspectives. Keep learning. Keep asking those tough questions.
Because this whole journey of figuring out faith and truth and what it all means, it's an ongoing thing. There's always more to discover.
Couldn't agree more. Until next time, everyone, keep diving deep. And be sure to check out these other videos.